Oh, what's up, everybody? I'm Matt Gary, and today I'm going to start a brand new series called Salesforce Open Source MVPs. And for those of you who are wondering, why start this? What is open source? What's the whole point of this? There are so many great free open source applications or libraries that exist for Salesforce that almost no one seems to know exist. Things from different DML mocking frameworks to the Apex Commons library to the application that one of the authors is going to show you here today. And if the community knew more about these things, I think a couple things would happen. Number one, we'd all have better, more unified code bases. Number two, a lot of managed packages might cease to exist and you'd save a lot of money. So my goal here is to just kind of expose that these open source libraries and applications exist and to give the authors a platform to be able to, number one, be recognized, and number two, show how these things work so that you all can leverage it yourself. So, without further ado, I have been lucky enough that James Simone, the author of the Joys of Apex blog, has agreed to show us how to use his newest application, open source app called Rollup, which will allow you to calculate rollups, rollup summaries for lookup fields, among other things, all for the price of free. So, I'm going to just fade into James now. I'll see you guys later.
Hey guys, and welcome to Coding with the Force. My name is James Simone. You may know me as the author of The Joys of Apex and several open source libraries surrounding Salesforce development. If you don't know me, pleased to meet you. Hailing from sunny Denver, Colorado, today I am here to talk to you guys about how to implement Apex Rollup. I hope that you'll enjoy. I'm going to move over to a simple flow that I've developed to help show off a simple example where I am selecting specific opportunities and rolling up their amounts. But before I proceed, I'm just going to talk a little bit about why you might want to use an open source rollup library. Previously, the open source options for doing something like a custom rollup were pretty much limited to DLRS, or declarative lookup rollup summaries, and some free options on the App Exchange that are more on the freemium price model, where you might get a few rollups but then have to pay for the overall product. Apex Rollup is forever free and allows you to perform unlimited rollups, as many as you'd like. And one of the big selling points for something like this is that in addition to being able to use master detail relationships, which have many limitations on the Salesforce platform, you all may be aware of the fact that you can only have 3 master detail relationships per record. There are many other limitations to them, not the least of which being performance. There is a tendency for records in master detail relationships, if you aren't careful about the way that you've created your object model, to suffer from record locking. And in addition to that, most people are using lookup relationships to map out the relationships that their various objects have anyway. In addition to that, one of the limitations that I've found in the use of DLRS and other open source rollup solutions is that lookup relationships don't always capture the relationship that you'd like to establish between two objects. And an example would be if you are ingesting data from an API and spreading that data out amongst multiple Salesforce objects, you may be relating those objects by the use of a common foreign key that's a string or a text-based relationship. That's fairly common when taking data from an API and putting it onto different objects. Now, that may not always be the case with the objects that you're ingesting via API. It's probably more common to have a one-to-one mapping between objects that are coming in and objects that you're creating. But I've had that happen from time to time, and in those instances, you can't use DLRS if you wanted to roll up details between the objects that share that unique identifier between different Salesforce objects, because DLRS only works for lookup relationships. Apex Rollup works with any unique key between objects. So if it's a text field, that works perfectly fine as long as the value in that text field is the same between your, quote unquote parent and child objects. In this example, however, I'm going to focus on standard Salesforce objects and simple ways in which you can implement this library and make use of it to either aid and abet in the development that you're doing or to sidestep development altogether. And an example of this that we're going to see here is this simple flow. So this is going to be an example of an auto-launched flow. I'll also go into a record triggered flow as well before showing a simple example of implementing Apex Rollup from within a trigger. So in this flow, because it's auto-launched, the first thing that I'm doing is getting opportunities. And in this specific case, I am using a filter on the opportunity records to get something nonsensical, basically to establish that no opportunities will be returned by this get records. And this helps to show a limitation in the flow engine that needs to be discussed in order to implement Apex Rollup with a auto-triggered flow, so a background flow. The reason that I'm mentioning this is because the output of a get records action in the flow engine where there are no matches actually doesn't align with the input criteria for Apex Rollup, which is one of the pieces of information that you need to provide have to be part of a S-object collection. In this case, the variable stored from the get records action. But in this instance, because the records are null, you actually have to create a decision element that goes and evaluates whether or not the opportunities are null before you can use them. And so if I debug this flow and I run it, what you'll basically see is that we get to the decision tree, and when that condition is evaluated, we can see that the opportunities are null, and so nothing happens. If I were to go back and remove this element entirely and go and create a new action specifically for rolling up, you'll see the issue that I'm facing. And this will also serve to go through the required inputs when you are using Apex Rollup from within a flow. So I'll just say rollup amounts to annual revenue, and we know that these are opportunities. And now I need to set the input fields. So the first thing that I'm setting is the field that's going to be rolled up, which in this case is the opportunity amount. And the lookup field is the opportunity's account ID. The lookup field on the rollup object is just the ID because we're working with the account now. The records to roll up, I'll select the opportunities from get opportunities. And the context, in this case, it's going to be an insert. There's more information about the rollup context in the README on the GitHub repo for Apex Rollup, but in general, with flows that are not record triggered, it will always be insert unless the objects are being modified in memory, in which case you would choose update. And the reason for that is because on the back end, once those records actually reach the apex part of the action, we're going and comparing them to the values in the database. So unless they differ from the values in the database, you should treat them just as an insert, because that is going to take the values that are being supplied here and roll them up. So the rollup object field is the field that we are looking to roll the values up to. So in this case, I'm going to use the annual revenue field that comes standard out of the box with Salesforce accounts, and the operation will be sum. The S object name that we're looking to roll up to is the account. I'm not going to use any of the optional fields for now, but there's quite a bit of customization that's possible when using this invocable action. So this will just go to show that if I resave this flow and go to debug it, I'll actually hit the error due to the flow runtime engine not passing an empty collection, but a null one. So we get this error message, error occurred, missing required input parameter records to roll up. If I were to go back and change the filter to something that does actually exist, and yes, I do have an opportunity with the name of test, when I rerun this debugging statement, we should be able to go and verify that the opportunities amount has now been rolled up to its specific account. So as you can see here, is success is reported as true. And when I go into this test opportunity, I should be able to validate that the opportunities account has had the amount rolled up to the account. And when I go here, let me reset the amount. So when I rerun this flow, we should be able to validate now that the action completes successfully and the test opportunities amount is rolled up to its account. And you can see here that its success is reported as true. And when I go and look at the opportunity with the name of test, the amount should end up getting rolled up to this account value. So when I go and refresh it and I look at the annual revenue, you can see that in fact the annual revenue has been updated with the contents of the opportunities amount. So that's an example of a simple auto-launched flow. And I have power users in production using auto-launched flows in conjunction with subflows to roll up 50 plus fields on objects to their related parent objects. Those people are using auto-launched flows, and in some instances subflows, and the get records actions to create really powerful declarative roll-up actions. And they're doing that across a variety of different fields. Some of them are using several dozen roll-up actions in a single auto-launched flow without any kind of performance implications. Now I want to move on to showing what a record triggered flow would look like. So if I go back to Flow Builder, I'm just going to open up a new flow and create a simple record triggered flow that makes use of Apex Rollup. So in this case, we are going to be using the opportunity object again. And for this specific example, we won't have any kind of conditional requirements about when the record triggered flow is invoked. So for this specific example, we're just going to have this one node for the rollup, and you're going to see that it's very similar to the one that was used with the auto launch flow, with the exception being that here we don't need to make a decision node in the flow in order to check if the records are null, because again, with the record triggered flow, we know that they're always not null and that they're being passed in as updates are being performed to the opportunity, or in this case, after an opportunity has been created. So again, select opportunity because we know that that's the object that we're acting on. We'll say amount. here we're going to need to assign a new resource, which is the value of the given record in the flow. And that's because we need to have a collection in order to pass the opportunity successfully into the flow. So here I've created a simple assignment node that adds to the ops collection that I created in the rollup action the given record that we are acting on. And then here you can see again that I'm using that ops variable as the collection for the invocable action. So let me just save this. And I'll activate this flow. And I'll use the same account that I was looking at before when I rolled up the test opportunity here, but I'm going to create a new opportunity now, and because the record triggered flow has been activated, we should be able to validate that the opportunity amount that I'm going to be newly creating gets successfully rolled up back to the parent account. So we can see that the opportunity was created, and when I refresh the account, you can see that the annual revenue has been updated accordingly with the value not only of the pre-existing annual revenue, since this is a sum-based operation, but also with the new amount for the new opportunity. So those are two simple examples of ways in which you can use declarative-based automation to quickly add rollups to objects, either in some kind of scheduled context via an auto-triggered flow, or from a process builder that is triggering that auto-launched flow, or from within a record-triggered flow, which has many of the same functionalities now as the Apex triggers that you come to know and love. Now I'll step into VS Code, and I'm going to walk you through a simple example of using Apex rollup from within Apex itself. So the important things to note when using rollup within triggers: typically you would be using a trigger handler framework in order to do this, but for now I'm going to go with a simple example within the trigger class itself. You need to have 4 contexts, trigger contexts, in order to make use of Apex rollup. So you need after insert, you need after update, you need before delete, and you need after undelete. So once I've created the trigger that we're going to be using, in this case again, the opportunity trigger, The one line of code that I need to add in order for Rollup to be able to hook into this trigger and interface with the custom metadata type that we're going to be supplying to it is going to be shown right here. And that's it. I also have Apex Prettier on, so you'll see that my file is automatically being prettified. And now that I've saved this trigger, I'm ready to go back into the configuration side of Apex in order to configure the rest of the Rollup's actions. So the first thing I'm going to do, however, is I'm going to deactivate the record triggered flow because I want to validate that the only thing that is happening is coming from the Apex triggers themselves. So here in my custom metadata types, when you install Rollup, you get access to two different custom metadata types associated with it. One is Rollup, which is the one that we're going to be using today. The other is Rollup Control, which allows you to set sensible defaults for the usage of Rollup, and actually one record called org defaults is included by default, and you are free to either modify that record or you can also tie Rollup control items to specific rollups in order to manage them that way. Now on the custom metadata side, I'm making use of field definition and entity definition particles in order to establish these relationships. What that means is that you get these fancy pick lists out of the box for you to be able to select your parent and child objects. However, with custom metadata types in Apex, there are two known limitations when it comes to selecting your parent and child objects, and those are you can't select the task or event objects. When you are using these dropdowns, you'll see there's no activity here, there's no task, and there's no event. In addition to that, there's no user object. So those two limitations, no user and neither of the activity objects, make it so that if you want to do rollups from those objects, you can either hook into static methods that are exposed via Apex, and you can create triggers on those objects in order to interact with them. So for example, if this were another trigger, let's say I create a new trigger specifically for the user object, and let me just copy these contexts back into here. So if I'm on my user trigger now and I want to actually roll up values from the user to another object, I can do so by making use of the static methods on Rollup that allow me to do any of the given Rollup actions. So let's say that I want to roll up values from the user to another object in our Salesforce org. I can either use flow to do this as shown previously, or I can make use of the static methods exposed in Apex in order to interact with Rollup. So for example, if I needed to count distinct fields that were filled out on specific users, it could be department, it could be people that are in a specific department that you want to roll up to another configuration object that you have available to you, but only some users have that field filled out, then I can do that from within these static Apex methods as well. So with my autocomplete, I'm basically going to be providing the same values that you saw in the Flow engine, but some things you get out of the box with triggers. For example, you don't need to, when you're interacting with Rollup from these static methods off of it, you don't need to supply the records to it in a trigger context because you already have the trigger records available to you, or I do when Rollup is running. So in this example, I might want to count off of, as I said, the user department. And this is the lookup field is the item that needs to be shared either as a text-based field or a lookup-based field to the user. So in this case, let's just say that it's the user ID. This is the field that matches the one that I just set in there, and I don't have a lookup relationship to user in this dev-ed box, but this could just be whatever it is that you're using, and you would have that lookup relationship established, and then here this would be the field that you're looking to roll up to. And then this would be your very classic my custom object data set. And that would be how you would interact with Rollup from within Apex if you were not going to use the custom metadata route due to those aforementioned limitations. Otherwise, you're fine to simply use the run from trigger invocation and then hook into that via the custom metadata. So again, we'll do rollup amount to account annual revenue. So the lookup field on the lookup object is the account ID, or sorry, it's the, yeah. So the lookup field on the lookup object is the account ID. The rollup field on the lookup object, now we're using that annual revenue field. So we'll select that. The calc item we know is the opportunity. And the lookup field on the calc item, again, is the account ID, and the rollup field on the calc item is the amount. Now, the rollup control that I'm going to establish for this example is just the org default. Again, you can configure specific rollup controls to interact with specific rollups that you are using, but this is otherwise a required lookup relationship. And again, I'm going to leave the other optional fields blank. So when I save this record, I have now given Rollup everything that it needs to interact with opportunities and roll those values up to account. So when I come back to my test account, I've cleared out the annual revenue field just to show, and I'm going to create a new opportunity. And here, Rollup will have everything that it needs based off of the custom metadata in order for the rollup to be performed from the Apex trigger. So here we'll say testing rollup from the Apex trigger, and we'll give the opportunity a nice big amount to validate that the rollup is working. And when I refresh my account, based off of that opportunity having been created, you can see that the annual revenue is successfully appended to the parent record. So that's it. Those are 3 simple examples of how you can use record-triggered flows, auto-launched flows, and Apex itself in conjunction with custom metadata or without to make use of Apex Rollup in your Salesforce orgs to achieve complex rollup functionality. I hope that you guys enjoyed watching this, and I hope that you will give Apex Rollout a try the next time that you need to do rollups in any of your given Salesforce orgs. Thanks so much.
All right, guys, that's it. Thank you so much to James for taking the time to do this. Thank you all for watching, and let me know who you'd like to see do this next. What other open source libraries are you guys interested in having tutorials done by their very own authors? Let me know, and I will do my absolute best to get those people here. Obviously, I can't guarantee it, but I will do my best for sure. That's it. If you want more videos like this, make sure to subscribe, and I will see you all next time.